Yo, what's up? Dr. Swole here, MD bodybuilder, back with another video. Today we're going to be talking about HIIT versus LISS cardio. Now the topic of what type of cardio is best for fat loss and muscle growth is a common topic of debate in bodybuilding. And today we're going to be shedding some light on the topic by going over the 4 different types of cardio and their pros and cons. Okay, quick outline for today. First of all, we're going to go over the definitions for the 4 different types of cardio. Then we'll talk about pros and cons of each type. And lastly, we'll put everything together and I'll give you some of my recommendations on the best modality for cardio. Keep in mind that our primary goal here is aesthetics. In other words, we want to maximize the amount of muscle we put on, or we want to maximize the amount of fat we lose while continuing to build muscle or at least retaining it. If you've been enjoying my content so far, make sure you smash that like button, hit subscribe, and let's get right into it. All right, let's start with some definitions. There are 4 main types of cardio that I want to touch on. The first is HIIT, or high intensity interval training. This usually involves short 10 to 30 second bursts of all-out activity followed by a longer period of rest. The rest period is usually around 1 to 3 times the length of the high intensity interval. Common examples of this would be sprint or bike intervals. For instance, a HIIT workout consisting of sprints on the bike or on land might consist of a 30-second period of all-out exertion followed by a 1.5 minutes of rest, which might consist of walking or very slow cycling. And you might do around 6 to 10 cycles of that. The next type of cardio here is LISS, or low intensity steady state cardio. This could be defined as continuous activity where you're able to comfortably chat during the session. Examples of LISS cardio might include incline or brisk walking or light cycling. The next type of cardio is moderate intensity steady state cardio. I'll define this as continuous activity where you're able to speak a little bit but not easily during. Examples would include jogging or swimming. And lastly, we have high intensity steady state cardio. This would be vigorous, sustained activity where you're not able to speak during the session. For example, a hard run. Note that when we're talking about steady state cardio, we typically mean a duration of at least 10 minutes. Before we get into the pros and cons, I want to talk about the goals of cardio. Now there are 2 main purposes for cardio for us as bodybuilders. First of all, we want to burn calories. Now the next main goal when we're implementing cardio is to make sure we're not interfering with muscle growth. We don't want cardio interfering with the actual process of hypertrophy itself on a cellular level. This is what happens when your body repairs muscle damage and actually increases muscle size after your workout. But the other component of this, which I think is often overlooked, is to look at cardio's impact on training performance. Working out is what delivers the stimulus to trigger the process of hypertrophy. And it's really important that we optimize our training stimulus if we want to build muscle. So we want to make sure cardio doesn't affect our weight training workouts, because that will indirectly affect our hypertrophy. If you don't give your body an adequate stimulus, it's not going to adapt. Okay, now that we have the tools to analyze these different types of cardio, let's get into the pros and cons of HIIT. In terms of pros, HIIT cardio is nice because it saves time. This is due to its high intensity nature, as well as this phenomenon called EPOC, which stands for excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. You may have heard of this as the so-called afterburn or stoking the metabolism after your HIIT workout. What I want to clear up here though is that HIIT cardio isn't some sort of magic trick that allows you to burn way more calories. Even when you take the extra calories from EPOC into account, with HIIT, you're really burning around the same calories as you would for a LISS session of about twice the length, which is still significant. A 20-minute HIIT session versus a 40-minute LISS session is a lot more efficient. The other pro of HIIT cardio is that it's more fast twitch, or more broadly, it's more similar to our hypertrophy style training. The high force output involved with HIIT training makes it more similar to our gym workouts where we're lifting heavy weights. This results in less interference with the actual process of hypertrophy. Now in terms of the cons of HIIT cardio, the first one is that it comes with a high recovery cost. If you've ever done sprint interval workouts, you'll know that they're very demanding both mentally and physically. And the issue here is that if you're fatigued from HIIT training, your hypertrophy workouts might suffer. And if you're not able to perform as well in the gym, you're gonna have a suboptimal hypertrophy stimulus. Now the caveat here is that it depends on how much you're actually training. If you're already maxing out your body's recovery abilities with your hypertrophy style workouts, the recovery cost of HIIT cardio is really going to affect you. The other con of HIIT cardio is that there's a higher risk of injury. Since you're using really high force output and high impact activity, you're putting yourself at more risk for injury. Now let's talk about LISS, or low intensity steady state cardio. The first pro is that it's less fatiguing. As you become more advanced and you need to train harder to see continued hypertrophy progress, recovery becomes very important. And the fact that LISS cardio is low impact and low velocity means you'll have more recovery resources to put towards hypertrophy. Now, the main con of LISS cardio is that it's less time efficient. Low intensity cardio really doesn't burn that much more energy than you do at baseline, which is a common misconception people have when they think that walking on a treadmill for an hour will burn a ton of calories. All right, now we're gonna touch on moderate to high intensity steady state cardio. I'm just gonna lump these together. The pros and cons will increase as you increase the intensity of the exercise. Starting off with the pros, these higher intensities of steady state cardio tend to burn more calories in the same amount of time compared to LISS. Moving on to the cons, a more intense steady state cardio may interfere more with hypertrophy. I put a question mark here because it's still theoretical at this point. There's not enough science out there to tell us the effect that intensity has on the type of cardio we perform in terms of the process of hypertrophy itself. However, we do know that higher intensities of steady state cardio will lead to a higher recovery cost and injury risk. All right, so now that we've gone over the pros and cons, let's give you some recommendations on the best modalities of cardio for fat loss and muscle growth. Starting off with HIIT, a lot of bodybuilders will tell you that HIIT is bad. I think that it's fine, but should be used in certain limited scenarios. The main case where I'd recommend HIIT cardio is if you're short on time or recovery is not an issue. High intensity intervals are just a very efficient way to fit in your cardio. Now, we talked about HIIT cardio has the con of a high recovery cost, but if you haven't already maxed out your body's recovery resources with your hypertrophy training, some HIIT cardio isn't going to hurt you. This will vary a lot depending on the person and how hard you're training, but for most people, if you're in the gym 3 days a week or less, you're probably not maxed out in terms of your recovery ability. And if your body still has recovery resources to spare, some HIIT cardio isn't going to hinder your gym workouts. That being said, since HIIT is so demanding, I would typically recommend limiting it to 1 to 2 sessions per week. Lastly, if your main goal is hypertrophy, I would recommend choosing a low impact modality. Something like cycle sprints is going to be less damaging to your body than doing sprints on land. Now, in terms of low intensity steady state cardio, my recommendation is to use it if you're already reaching your systemic limit of fatigue. This doesn't apply as much to beginners because if you're in your first 1 to 2 years of training, you don't need that much training to maximize your hypertrophy response. For example, a beginner might do just fine doing 3 days of training, but as they become more advanced, they might require 4 or 5 days of training to really maximize their hypertrophy. This means as you become more advanced, you're going to challenge your systemic limit of fatigue more and more as you increase that training stimulus in order to see continued progress. How do you know if you're pushing your limit of fatigue? You can look at training performance, your mood and energy, and aches and pains. If any of those are becoming a problem, recovery might be an issue, and you should be careful when thinking about how to program your cardio by looking at the recovery cost that type of cardio results in. In terms of recovery cost, if you are doing HIIT cardio, as I said, you should be limiting that to 1 to 2 sessions per week. Any further cardio you want to do if you need more of a calorie deficit should be done with LISS, in my opinion. Now, I do think that LISS is going to be ideal for advanced athletes since for the most part, people who've been training for a long time need to really push their recovery limit in order to impose a large enough stimulus to actually see growth. The other special case is if you're going through an extreme fat loss phase. If you're trying to lose weight at a very fast rate, your systemic limit of fatigue actually goes down. Being in that large calorie deficit reduces your body's ability to recover. So you're gonna have less resources to go around to spend on your training and your cardio. So you wanna minimize the recovery cost from cardio so you can continue to train optimally. Extreme fat loss also applies to people who are trying to get very, very lean. If you're really trying to get shredded, like less than 8% body fat for males and less than 18% body fat for females, you're going to have less recovery ability. And I think it makes sense to use low intensity cardio to make sure you're continuing to perform well in the gym. Now, in terms of moderate and high intensity steady state cardio, my current recommendation would be to avoid it if your goal is to really maximize muscle growth. That's not to say that you can't use these forms of cardio. They may be okay for beginners or those who are using a low training volume. In other words, people who aren't maxing out their recovery resources and still have some recovery ability to spare. And most importantly, if your hypertrophy progress is good. Lastly, I'll say that the bottom line here is that you should do what is sustainable and enjoyable. A cardio routine is only going to be effective if you can actually stick to it. If you're really short on time, then go ahead and do HIIT cardio. And if you really enjoy running and can't see yourself doing anything else for cardio, then go ahead. But just think about the pros and cons when you're implementing your programming and really trying to optimize your progress. That's all for now, guys. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like the video and leave me a comment below. I answer every single one of my comments, so you'll definitely hear back from me. Comment of the week is from Limited Edition Being on my last video featuring a full day of eating. He commented on the video as soon as I uploaded it, and it's great to see my loyal subscribers who are part of the notification gang. So if you haven't already, make sure you hit the notification bell when you subscribe so that you don't miss any of my videos. If you want to learn more about cardio, check out my last video on cardio where I talk about the pros and cons of cardio itself for fat loss, maximized muscle growth, and health. If you haven't already, hit subscribe and we'll see you next time.